A few months ago, I made a tier list ranking the best PvE subclasses in Destiny 2, and while there were some standout winners, there was also a clear loser, with Arc Warlock ranking as the worst subclass in the game for me. However, the sandbox is always changing, with buffs and nerfs to OP subclasses that opens the door for new builds to shine. So today, I'll be covering an Arc Warlock build that has transformed from one of the worst subclasses in the game to one of the most broken endgame builds I've used in a very long time. I'm Above, and if you enjoyed today's video, a like and subscription would be greatly appreciated. Now, let's get into it. Some of Destiny's best ability regen exotics have been nerfed substantially over the past few seasons, most notably the Heart of Inmost Light and Starfire Protocol. We also saw nerfs to storm grenades due to their combination of high damage output and linger duration, opening the door for pulse grenades, which received a massive 20% damage buff in PvE. And this buff is even crazier than it seems. Most Arc builds are now based around ionic traces, as they provide significant ability regen when picked up. And since pulse grenades are actually insane in endgame content now, you can easily secure kills on multiple targets with a single grenade ability and generate ionic traces like crazy. The more of these we pick up, the faster we can cycle our abilities, and this gameplay loop becomes even more powerful with the Fallen Sunstar. This exotic states that ionic traces travel faster and grant additional ability energy when we pick them up. Our nearby allies will also gain ability energy every time we pick up an ionic trace, which makes this exotic fantastic for both solo and team play. Fallen Sunstar wasn't used all that much during the storm grenade meta because ability regen was already incredibly potent with elemental wells, which made ionic traces somewhat of an afterthought. But now that elemental wells are gone and storm grenades have been nerfed, this exotic has skyrocketed in value. So let's dive into the build. First up, we're going to be utilizing Chaos Reach, as this super received a 25% damage buff in PvE with update 7.1.0 at the start of the season. And sustained damage will also now create a lightning strike that jolts enemy targets, making this a fantastic single target super while also having the capabilities for ad clear. Chaos Reach just wasn't the same after the nerf to Geomag stabilizers, but this buff has made a noticeable difference in endgame PvE. In terms of abilities, the Healing Rift and Pulse Grenades are essential to today's build, with the melee being interchangeable based on personal preference. In my opinion, Pulse Grenades are far and away the best option after the 20% damage buff, while the Healing Rift allows us to play extremely aggressive in underleveled content. These abilities synergize incredibly well with today's aspects, with the first one being Electrostatic Mind. This states that defeating targets with arc abilities or defeating jolted or blinded targets creates an ionic trace, and collecting an ionic trace will make us amplified. This is perfect for the Fallen Sunstar because every time we pick up an ionic trace, we'll have increased ability regen for not only ourselves, but our teammates as well. Next, we have Arc Soul, which states that casting your Rift creates an arc soul that fires at targets in front of you, and allies can pass through your rift to collect these arc souls. Your rift also charges faster when allies are near, and while amplified, your arc souls are supercharged, meaning they deal increased damage and gain an increase to their fire rate as well. Do not underestimate this ability. I thought this would be the weakest part of the kit, but it actually synergizes perfectly with Electrostatic Mind. These arc souls do a surprising amount of damage in endgame PvE and can easily kill red bar enemies even in Grandmaster level content. And every time this happens, Electrostatic Mind will proc, generating ionic traces that feed our ability regen even further. These are also incredibly helpful for killing things like Lucent Moths, Fallen Trip Mines, and other annoying enemies that can easily catch you off guard. So to recap, we have a super that jolts targets and does well in both single target damage and the ad clear department. Our Rift not only heals us, it also generates arc souls, while our pulse grenade absolutely nukes enemies after the recent 20% buff. This allows them to generate ionic traces like crazy, and every time we generate an ionic trace, we get increased ability gains from the Fallen Sunstar, which allows us to become amplified and makes our arc souls even more potent. There's already so much synergy here, and we haven't even covered our fragments just yet. First up, we have Spark of Shock, which allows our arc grenades to jolt enemy targets. Jolt is unbelievably strong in endgame PVE right now, and since this build is based around defeating jolted enemies, when you pair it with how strong pulse grenades are on their own, and the fact that this fragment allows them to stun overload champions intrinsically, this is an absolute must pick here. Next, we have Spark of Ions, which states that defeating a jolted target creates an ionic trace. Now, what's crazy about this is the fact that this stacks with Electrostatic Mind, which means that every time we defeat a jolted target, we generate 2 ionic traces for the price of 1. The ability regen with 1 ionic trace is pretty good, but getting 2 per jolted target takes this build to pre-nerf Heart of Inmost Light levels of insanity. We can then pair this with Spark of Magnitude to increase the linger duration of our pulse grenades from 4.5 seconds to 6.5 seconds, making them even more potent at generating ionic traces. And last but not least, we have Spark of Resistance, which grants us an additional 20% damage resist when surrounded by enemies. And this is stackable with tier 10 resilience, which makes us incredibly tanky. I personally find these to be the strongest fragments, but you can potentially swap one of these for Spark of Discharge, which gives Arc Weapon Final Blows a chance to generate an ionic trace. And though this can be strong, it does restrict your loadout a bit, and this fragment isn't necessary to make this build shine. As we move into the armor mods, on the helmet we have Ashes to Assets. This provides super energy on grenade final blows, and with how much we'll be using our grenades, this mod speeds up our super regen significantly. We'll also be slotting a heavy ammo finder to keep ourselves topped off on ammo should we need it. On the gauntlets, I went with Bolstering Detonation, which grants class ability energy when we cause damage with our grenade. This will not only help us rotate our abilities much easier, it also gives 100% uptime on our Arc Souls and synergizes perfectly with a class item mod that I'll be touching on later in the video. I also went with Firepower, which generates an orb of power for each of our grenade final blows. And yeah, we'll be doing that a lot. The chest piece doesn't really impact our build all that much, but is worth noting nonetheless. I recommend that you run at least 1 concussive dampener to reduce AoE splash damage effects, and you can swap the elemental resist based on the activities that you're running. Now, this is where the build gets crazy. On the boots, we have Innervation, which reduces our grenade cooldown every time we collect an orb of power. So each time we throw a grenade, we reduce our rift cooldown with Bolstering Detonation. We gain super energy with Ashes to Assets, and generate orbs with Firepower on grenade final blows. We also generate ionic traces that we can collect to refund roughly 2/3 of our grenade energy, and can pair this with Elemental Charge for a chance to gain an armor charge every time we collect an ionic trace for a free damage bonus at all times. And each time we pick up an orb, we'll reduce our grenade cooldown even further, which is a fantastic backup option should your ionic traces fail to track towards you. And last but not least, we have the class item, which is where the build really comes together. First up, I went with Double Bomber, which reduces our grenade cooldown each time we use our class ability. And we'll pair this with Powerful Attraction, which automatically collects nearby orbs of power every time we do this. So we'll start by throwing a grenade, and as it kills enemies and begins producing orbs, we can cast a rift to instantly get 1/3 of our grenade back from Double Bomber, and instantly collect any nearby orbs of power for additional grenade recharge. And as the ionic traces make their way towards us, they'll instantly top off our abilities, allowing us to repeat this gameplay loop over and over and over again. And the best part is that all of this works without seasonal artifact mods. There are obviously several that will make this build even stronger over the next couple of months, but this build absolutely destroys endgame content on its own and has quickly become one of my favorite subclasses in all of Destiny 2. If you enjoyed today's video, a like and subscription would be greatly appreciated, and you can catch me live over on Twitch at twitch.tv/abub, where I'll be using this build to help people guild their Conqueror seals all season long. I'll let a solo Lost Sector play out in the background so you guys can see this build in action, and other than that, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Peace!